Again, thank you so much for being here. Next panel is going to be run by my great friend Robin from Beecham Research, and it's going to go on. And then after that, Robin is going to give us his words of wisdom for about 10 minutes on platform.
As Steve mentions, I'm Robin Duke-Woolley from Beecham Research. We spend a lot of our time doing market research and analysis in the M2M and IoT space. I say M2M because there are probably quite a lot of people here who think about the connected devices market as M2M and not IoT. So we try to bridge that gap. But so we're going to run a panel session now with these 4 panelists, including Jeff, who's already effectively introduced himself. So I think it would be useful for the others if we just ask them who they are and what they've been doing in AI, just to come up to speed with Jeff. So Patrice, would you start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Patrice Slupowski from Orange, and I'm in charge of several digital innovation topics, roughly on the product marketing side, all the things which are on platforms, so mainly IoT, those kind of things. And we're very much involved in AI and the way that we're looking at several developments that are definitely going to change the way we're interacting with our customer and the way our customer is going to interact with their environment.
Great. Okay. Ajay.
My name is Ajay Kulkarni. I'm the co-founder CEO of a company called Timescale. We're developers of a new open source time series database. So we're data guys, data people. And one thing we found is, I think Jeff alluded to this, the volume of data keeps increasing to the point where it's hard for us as humans to make sense of it. And that's where we really find IoT and AI really play a role that we make sense of all this data.
Hi, I'm Marc Brungger. I'm the CEO of Tourmaline Labs. I was involved the last 2-3 years with what I would call basic machine learning in the telematics industry, and the last couple of months as the first consultant and now CEO of Tourmaline Labs, which is a mobility AI platform. We basically score, aggregate, normalize mobility data, and put it through our AI platform, and we'll talk a little more.
That's great. Okay. So we have a number of discussion points that we're going to go through now, but if there are any questions from the audience, then do stick your hand up and we'll interrupt what we're saying and answer your question as well. So we want to make this as interactive as we can. AI is a pretty new subject to a lot of us, but obviously not to Jeff. Or some of these people around here. So if you have something that is, don't worry about whether it's a basic question or not. I'm going to start off with some fairly basic questions. So just ask whatever you want to ask, and we'll make it a more interactive and interesting session that way. Okay, so I think just to start the process off, why should we pay attention to AI? Now, some of you have started to answer that, but I think it's useful just to go over that. So Jeff, perhaps you could start that off, because you kind of got into that and then you shot off into all sorts of areas during your relatively short speech, but you packed a lot in.
Yeah. Well, why should we pay attention to AI? I think in part it's because of the data explosion that Ajay mentioned a minute ago. Practical reality is that humans cannot handle the amount of data that is being produced in a way that we can and should be interacting with it. So leverage, knowledge leverage, and the ability to have some leverage as humans in handling the data volume so that we can get to the stuff that matters versus having to deal with everything before we know if it matters or not, is a very powerful and compelling reason to pay attention to artificial intelligence. I think a related point, one of my old colleagues, Rudy Purrier, who has finally retired from Bain after 1 million years of being a consultant, he used to describe the generational thinking of technology as talking about data processing way back in the day. For those of us like me who are as old as dirt and can remember that, data processing was where we dealt with data points, but we didn't really have a way to associate them. So we were capturing data in a very generally manual or simple automated way. The next generation was information processing, where we added relationships to the data, and that gave us an ability to have some usefulness around the information because we could relate it. The third generation then was he referred to as content or knowledge, where you add basically context to the information. And his observation at the time he first shared this model, which was about 25 years ago, was the next generation we might hope for is when you take knowledge and you apply insight, and then you get wisdom technology. Now, I don't think we're there yet, but I think with the explosion of data and the increased intensity and dependence we all have in our businesses or our organizations, or even as individual consumers, right? Because all of us as consumers are already digital warriors. Everybody already is. Certainly my kids are. So if you think in terms of the dependence we have on information and context, that knowledge thing is already something we need to have more of. And yet the explosion of data is actually inhibiting our ability to get to the knowledge because there's too much stuff to wade through. And none of us have the bandwidth to be able to do it. And AI offers us a vehicle to be able to have a smart sense of filters that present us what we ought to pay attention to, rather than all the stuff that's out there.
Hey, Patrice, perhaps you could pick that up, the wisdom bit, for perhaps, or the fact that maybe there's quite a lot of setup that needs to be done to actually make this work.
Yeah, I would be shorter. Elevator pitches, you know, when you meet customers, investors, etc. So reasons, in 3 words, it's sexy. In 5 words, AI is the new UI. So I may elaborate on that if you want, right. But when I was speaking about the customer relations, it's a promise that it would change his perspective, and he may have some kind of dream experiences like the one he's having when he's watching movies, major movies like Iron Man, when you see Tony Stark speaking with the house, etc. It's that kind of promise that can be activated. Whether you're speaking with a robot or you think that you have a cat home that can become the king of this castle and being able to say whether someone in the family was there a few minutes ago, etc. Or can give a voice to the object as well.
So AJ, is AI the panacea for everything?
Well, I think, AI is kind of a broad term. And of course, I think panacea it's also a broad term. I think AI is going to introduce probably as many challenges as opportunities. So it's more than a panacea. It's actually going to create a lot of headaches for us as well. But AI is the end game. I mean, what's happening is that we keep collecting more and more data. Part of that is that storage keeps getting cheaper and bandwidth keeps getting cheaper. The other part is IoT, where we have all these new sources of data that we didn't have before. You know, our cars are now transmitting data. Our wrists are transmitting data. We have home security systems that transmit data. And how do you make sense of it? Well, step one is maybe you detect anomalies. Okay, that's a type of data, but that's a kind of a reactive AI, right? So what's better than reactive, proactive? So then that's prediction, it's prevention. That's another level of AI, maybe even detection. And so I think where we're headed is a world where we already have more data than we know what to do with, and that growth is just going to continue even faster and faster. And so I mean, AI is where we're heading, and so I don't know. We can really question it. I think that there's a next order of questions that do come up that maybe you're going to lead us to, is that when we do introduce AI, then what happens? What happens to when Uber starts having self-driving cars? What happens to all their drivers or their partners, right? As soon as we have these automated call centers, what happens to those call center workers? And I think those are some of the challenges that we'll have to tackle, and the solution there won't be AI, but we'll have.
I love your sentence, we're heading for AI. Yeah. It's better than when you open the news and you have the impression that we're running for natural stupidity.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to say from a practical perspective, the industry has done a good job of measures gets done, so collecting the data in the telematics and the IoT, basic reporting, very light on predictive, and I think AI truly allows to be more accurate. So, when you look at the progressive insurance program, it only takes 12 basic elements into account and it scores people. With AI, you can take into consideration the weather. If you accelerated on a freeway on-ramp versus an off-ramp makes a big difference. So you can become much more accurate versus just an average with basic elements. And then in addition to that, I think, again, the predictive nature. So if you track mobility, it's not just what the person did in the past, but you can say with 98% certainty that Marc Brungger at 8:30 a.m. is on this location. So again, much more predictive and more accuracy is what hasn't been achieved with, I would say, the current state in the IoT and telematics space.
So Jeff, what would you say is the difference between just straight data processing and AI? Would you see that there is a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing that's different about straight data processing is, go back to transaction capture, transaction, do a process to a transaction and result in posting something to a master file and producing an output, whether it's a report or an online screen or an alert or what have you. But that end-to-end activity represents some version of information flow tied to a business process, a business activity.
Right.
In AI, at least the way I'm thinking of it for this context of the question, all of the possible exceptions can be handled by the autonomous engine, which frees up the person who might otherwise have to be involved in making decisions along the way to be able to concentrate on things that can't be routinized. So like if there's another key distinction that underlies, I think, everybody's comments up to now, it's that the repetitive stuff is the stuff that where this engine lends itself towards.
Right.
The unpredictable, the thing that doesn't have a pattern, the thing that has less than a 20% likelihood of him being in one place versus another place at a time, doesn't lend itself well today to an AI application. Because the deviation on the tails is too wide for you to have confidence in the predictability. So as we get rid of the stuff that's routine, it frees up the humans who can handle all that fuzzy stuff to do the fuzzy stuff.
Right, okay.
And not be tied down doing the repetitive stuff, which today takes up too much time.
So how do you define what's fuzzy stuff and what's not fuzzy stuff? How do you define what can be done with AI and what shouldn't be done with AI?
I think creative stuff, ideation work, creative problem solving work, collaborative stuff that requires multiple people and multiple perspectives to be included, which are varied, so it's not the same group collaborating every time. Those are all things I think that would challenge any machine or machine engine to be able to understand how to incorporate the right set this time versus the next time. Things that are related to emotion, things that are related to things that are interpreted based on nonverbal cues. We can teach a machine parts of that, right? Facial recognition and what have you. But as a practical matter, a lot of that still depends on things that the human brain is wired in a way that no software has been able to replicate and won't, I think, for some time. Those who believe in the singularity might want to argue with me. We'll do that over a beer later. But I think practical standpoint, there is a boundary around which the technology can address. And it's a very big set of things that we do today that cost a lot of money and take a lot of human attention. Replacing or addressing that with solutions can free people up to do the things that are harder and require more of humanity's involvement.
Yeah, so Patrice, can you give an example perhaps of an area that AI is perfect for?
Well, as we were saying, every time we want to go beyond computing, not only because we have a large amount of data, but because we want to escape the way things were coded. So it's a way, by saying that we're going to repeat processes that are going to be learning processes that are going to go in depth, it's perfect for AI. I would disagree on the idea that we cannot handle or we cannot react to things that are spoken as emotions, etc., since we can really think of some human beings reacting the same way as they were coded the same, also themselves. But now we are seeing, for instance, in the robotic space, we are seeing some robots being able to react to that or to stimulate some emotions in the way they interact with the people. So I wouldn't oppose that. I'm just saying that on one side we have a machine, on the other side we have a human being, and they may differ by some of the elements. But we shouldn't be very definitive in the way we're closing the boundaries, because there are some surprises coming probably.
That's great. Ajay, can you think of a particular application that you've been involved in, perhaps, that has been very successful?
Sure, happy to. Actually, I'm going to start off first by kind of continuing on a thought that a thread that Jeff kind of started, which is, what is AI? And I kind of want to change the way we think about AI. We used to think about the tech industry, the software industry, but now everything has tech and software in it. There's a funny comic I remember from maybe 5 or 10 years ago where these two kids are talking, and one asks the other, like, what does your dad do? And he says, other one says, well, he works with computers. And then the first one says, as opposed to what? Right? Because everything now is, you're somehow interacting with some kind of computer. And I think AI is the next evolution of that. Eventually, I think AI, I think the movies like to paint this picture of AI being like a robot you talk to, or some kind of agent you talk to. But AI, it's already in our search engines, it's already in our route optimization, it's already in our alerting systems. It's going to be behind the scenes. To some degree, it'll be in front of the scenes as well through Alexa. But I think AI is going to be something that's just software going forward. One example that we've seen of this, where we've been involved, is in the industrial IoT space. We work with a company that, and this is probably a familiar example to many people, it's in a vibration sensing space, and they sense vibration data off of electric motors. The end goal is to do preventive maintenance. Now that's a multi-stage process. Step one, where they are today, is essentially human-assisted AI for anomaly detection. So they have these models that essentially do a first pass on all the data, because it's a lot of data, that say, oh, I think something bad is happening here, and I think it's this. We think the motor is getting old. We think something bad happened on the production line. And then they have experts who look at it and say, okay, that's right, and we need to do something about it. Or they say, actually, no, that's actually just noise. That's a miscalibration. We have to retrain the model. So that's where we are today, but that's actually a huge step from where they were before, which was just having a lot of data, not knowing what to do with it, or maybe even having these models that generated a lot of alerts, and then you have folks with pagers who just hit snooze on the alerts, right? But I think that's step one. I think human-assisted AI is step one with anomaly detection, and then maybe it's anomaly detection with purely through machine learning, and then it's prediction. I'm not sure if that helps.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Marc, perhaps you could answer some of the questions.
In the information services space, there always has been lots of information, and I would say the last 10 years, people used rules engines. So they process data and saying, if this happens, I do that. If this happens, I do this. But again, the machine didn't get smarter. So it did the same step 400 times, right, but it didn't improve. Whereas today, and this is used today in claims management for automotive accidents, now they can actually show pictures of accident, injuries, and they can compare to a million other front impact images, and the machine, with every claim it looks at, it gets better and better. And so I think, again, they are application where it's used today, and in certain cases it will take much longer than we think, and in others, like you mentioned, social media, it's already there today.
So the key difference between that data processing and AI is tuning. It gets better. It learns from the experience and doesn't necessarily make the same decisions again that it made before. Yeah. So is it going to replace all people? Are we going to find everybody out of a job?
Those are two different questions.
I know, but I'm running out of time.
Will it replace people? Already has. If you look at the retail industry, that already happened. Automation came through and did a wave of change of eliminating thousands of job types and hundreds of thousands of jobs. On the other hand, it created better jobs that didn't exist before because the automation created the possibility. So that's why I make the distinction. Will it eliminate jobs?
It'll change
Absolutely.
Jobs. Yeah,
what it'll do is change the nature of what's required. And I go back to this notion of knowledge leverage that I mentioned at the onset as my answer to the question of why is AI something we need to pay attention to. In any of these circumstances, any of the use cases we're talking about, what you boil it down to is, it is creating knowledge leverage for people to handle a body of data or information that otherwise they could never handle in a natural way. Right. And that's the power of AI, at least in the current generation of stuff we're working with.
So is it the promise for IoT in the future? Is it what will bring IoT to life in the future?
My short answer is hell yes, because otherwise the exponential data growth will bury us, and you'll end up not using most of what's generated, even though it all costs something to generate.
Right.
You know, we talk about slotting allowances and slotting issues in the retail industry, and the fact is, if you put something on the shelf, it costs you to have it there whether you sell it or not. So what you want to have is something that does sell versus something that doesn't. That's why item movement is so important. This is the same issue. Every data point I capture, it costs me something to capture that data. Every moment I store it, costs me something to store it. And every time I access it, it costs me something to access it, whether it's of any interest or not. So what I want are the interesting things. And I got to have some intelligence to help me figure out the interesting from the not interesting.
Patrice, any final comment from you? Because we're out of time.
Well, I'm not opposing artificial intelligence and machines and human beings. I think that we may find more collaboration than expected. It's true that it's giving an absolute must for everybody to be able to adapt. This has always been the case, that you have to adapt or die, and some of the jobs will clearly disappear, be replaced by machines, and in some cases we may also see that some machines will be abandoned if they are not able to handle new types of solutions. We're living in societies where people are feeling alone, etc., so they would value contact. We're seeing that, for instance, in our cost center. Okay. People are calling sometimes only because they're alone, not because they have something to fix.
Yeah. Okay.
And in that case, even a very good chatbot or AI-powered machine will be limited to handle that.
Ajay, a final word from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is inevitable. It's happening. You can't fight it. You know, there's no point to be afraid of it. There's no point in living in fear. I think we should just embrace it and move on to these second-order questions, which have come up multiple times. Is, for example, jobs. How do we retrain all these people to be put out of work? You know, is that an education problem? Is that another type of problem? You know, how do we deal with ethics in AI? How do we deal with the biases in our machine learning models? And so, you know, I think fear ends up, you know, selling out of a lot of, well, not newspapers, but it gets you a lot of clicks, right? But I think as an industry, let's get past that and say, okay, you know, AI is inevitable. It's going to cause, you know, new challenges, and let's get ahead of those challenges and figure out how to solve them, because I think the rest of the country, rest of the world is going to be looking to our industry to take the lead on that.
Great. Marc, the final word from you.
Just quickly following up on a point Ajay made earlier is, you know, most companies have been collecting a tremendous amount of data over the last 5-10 years, but very few companies have been able to monetize and really you know, hit the nuggets or the treasure. So I would say this next phase is completely different, because the basic reports, the basic dashboards are in existence, but the true innovation will happen the next 2-3 years, and I think it's going to be an amazing journey. And you know, there's always with change some uncertainty and fear, but I think if you look back in 3-4 years, you couldn't have imagined life without having those insights and nuggets, which in most companies don't exist today.
That's great. Well, we've been warned.
Fear is not protecting from danger.
That's just true.
Okay, that's the end of the panel session. So thank you very much. I think that was very interesting.